Hello and welcome to the Bald Ambition podcast. I'm your very bald host, Mookie Spitz, and the one with ambition today is Michelle Waugh. Welcome aboard, Michelle.
Hi, and thank you.
Michelle is a personal tutor, and she specializes in special needs kids. And I brought her on to the pod today to talk about that in particular, but even in general, education. Right now in America, we're at a crossroads in so many aspects of our culture, our politics, how we do what we do. The Department of Education is being reevaluated, we might say, and our entire view about government and its role in our lives has its extensibility in education as well. Michelle has a doctorate. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's got a doctorate level education in microbiology. Is that correct?
Specifically plant pathology, studying diseases of plants.
And so she falls into the category of the advanced, educated American who is now dedicating herself to tutoring and teaching. So I thought she would be timely, topical, and relevant. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into tutoring kids with special needs? And by special needs, I'm assuming ADHD, what's now characterized as ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. I also understand English as a second language kids, which technically don't fall into this category, but they're kids at a disadvantage when it comes to education. And I think that also factors in.
I've also tutored kids with anxiety, real high anxiety, as well as obsessive compulsive disorder and dyslexia.
So what brought you to this specialty?
So how I got into tutoring, I've been in education since about 2003. And first as a teacher, and then I got laid off as a teacher during the economic downfall or
Downturn?
Downturn of 2010. I was working at a private school and I got laid off, and then I decided teaching was really stressful. So I decided I'd try going back into research. And so I got re-educated in stem cell research. But then the problem was I was overqualified and underexperienced. I couldn't find a job. So as I'm looking for a job, I started tutoring, and I fell in love with tutoring. That one-on-one teaching, that's my niche. I love education, and it was just the teaching itself in a classroom with 36 kids, and multiply that by 2 for the parents and administrators and everything. It was just really stressful. And so the one-on-one where you're dealing with one kid, maybe 2 kids, I do tutor 2 at a time sometimes. And that was more my style. And then I could tailor the lessons for that individual child. And I could pick too. If I didn't get along with parent, well, then I didn't have to tutor the kids. It was as easy as that. And I found parents that had the same goals that I did and wanted the best for their children. And that's basically how I got into tutoring.
So tutoring sounds to me like was a wonderful solution to some of the challenges that I'm sure many, if not most, American teachers can relate to. Crowded classrooms, high stress, minimal support, low pay. And you decided enough's enough of that. And you've got skills. You've got skills when it comes to a more one-on-one setting. It sounds like that helps when parents are vested in the welfare of their children and actively participate in that process. And you found a nice work-life balance by being able to substitute teach, if I have that correct.
Yeah, well, I was an instructional assistant first. And then I thought about going back into teaching because I was substitute teaching a little bit. Like when they couldn't find a substitute teacher, I would step in since I was credentialed, or I am credentialed. I would step in and be the substitute teacher. So I thought about going back to teaching. And in my interview, they said, you need to substitute teach and have a long term sub. Well, so now I'm substitute teaching. I've done the long term sub and I've decided I like substitute teaching better than being the actual teacher. And I really do like substitute teaching as well as the tutoring. They're a good combo. The problem with tutoring is it doesn't start until the afternoon when the kids get out of school. There are homeschools, but to be honest, they're not interested in tutoring as much as they're interested in part time teachers. And that doesn't work financially. So the best solution is to have the two jobs during the day, the substitute teaching, and then afternoon, evening tutoring.
That sounds interesting. So, once again, you are personally solving problems that many, many people face, which is the difficulty and stress of teaching. You've discovered that substitute teaching gives you the flexibility to change shit up, sounds like. And then it also opens you up to moonlighting, doing what you're really passionate about, it sounds like to me, which is the personal one on one instruction.
Yes, exactly.
And how did you gravitate toward the special needs kids?
I just saw success with them and it I just got a lot of satisfaction with the special needs kids. The first special needs student I've had was with dyslexia, and she was so intelligent, but she was doing poorly in school because she couldn't read. And what I found was the same techniques that work with your neurotypical kids work with the special needs kids. It's just, it requires more patience, repetition, and finding out how they learn. Like, for example, audiobooks for special needs is huge. If they listen to the book while they're reading along, that um, enables reading comprehension. And that works for neurotypical kids too. But it works especially well with special needs kids because they need that more intensive learning.
You bring up an interesting point. I think there might be a societal bias and maybe even a professional one that special needs kids need qualitatively different kinds of methodology for teaching. And what I'm hearing from you is techniques that work well for the neurotypical kid, the average Joe and Jane, include audiobooks as supplement, being patient, being
Yes.
focused, giving them time, giving them space. And it also sounds like personalizing instruction. So everyone's got their own way of learning, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory, slow, fast, in between. And when you're dealing with a special needs kids, whether it's ADHD or ASD or anxiety or what have you, then similar methodologies can apply, but just focus more, spend more quality time, and perhaps more deeply personalize the instruction. Just because these kids are by nature quirkier and a little bit more specialized, if you will.
Right. For example, there's only one way to teach phonics. You sound out the word and you sound out each part of the word. That doesn't change with the special needs kid. The student I taught to read, he was in fifth grade and teachers weren't able to teach him to read. They had said they had tried everything, but what he needed was one on one instruction. And I taught him to read using phonics and sight words. And we started off with Dr. Seuss books. And then we read Berenstain Bears and small chapter books. He's reading at the top of his special ed class now. And his parents never thought he would be literate, but it just took that one-on-one specialized tutoring to reach him. And he's reading street signs. he's reading the captions on TV. And the thing is, too, he's understanding it. He's not just reading the words, he's understanding them.
So how is he diagnosed as autistic?
Severely autistic.
Okay, so you started with a severely autistic fifth grader.
Yes.
And this severely autistic fifth grader was functionally illiterate.
Yes, he could read words like cat and dog, and that was about it.
So in the public school system, I'm assuming, with standard curricula.
He was in special ed classes.
Oh, so he was in special ed classes within the public school system. And he was severely autistic. And by fifth grade, as far as he could get was cat, dog.
Yes.
And how many sessions per week did you have with this child?
We just had one in 45 minutes.
So you're saying that one session once a week for 45 minutes over how lengthy a period did you tutor him to get him to the point of functional literacy?
I think it was about the summer.
So you're saying, and this is why it's wonderful having you on. Just to summarize, we have a functionally illiterate fifth grade boy who has been diagnosed with severe autism, who has been pretty much written off by the public school system, even with special needs assistance, as quote unquote hopeless. They hire you as a personal tutor, and the extent of your contribution to his education was one 45-minute session per week. And over the course of 2-3 months, you were able to get him to read, at least at the Dr. Seuss level.
He was reading second grade book. Well, at the end of the summer, he was reading Dr. Seuss and Berenstain Bears. Berenstain Bears is a little bit more sophisticated than Dr. Seuss. Has more compound words in it.
Right.
But he could read the compound words. He would sound out each word and put them together, which was pretty amazing from someone who couldn't at all.
Yeah. That's great. And now describe these 45-minute sessions. You mentioned early in our conversation that parental cooperation is vital for your tutoring to succeed. Now, were you in person with the child?
So this one was in person. So I didn't need as much parental help because he was focused on me because it was just him and me, and he loves the attention. So, and he loved seeing me. So it was unique in that it wasn't a battle.
Okay, so that's I think a very important point, because many autistic kids have difficulty with interpersonal connection and might not be as sympathetic to somebody showing up and saying, "Hi, now it's your learning time." But in this instance, you had an autistic child who actually liked you.
Yeah.
Who could relate to you.
And he'd seen me with his brother. I'd been tutoring his brother, who was in the general ed, neurotypical. I was tutoring him in reading comprehension, and that's how it started. And his mom basically said she wanted something to keep him busy. She really didn't have high hopes for him, but they always hoped that he'd be able to read, but they didn't really think that it would work. They just thought they'd try one more thing.
Terrific. So that also illustrates this idea of comfort. You have a severely autistic child who has gotten to know you from your in-person tutoring sessions with a sibling. And Michelle comes over, and Michelle's all right. She's not the boogeyman. She's not some mysterious force that I don't understand, but she's nice. She's simpatico. She smiles. My sibling had a good time. Kind of part of the family. So you started from the benchmark, if you will, of comfort for this child who one would assume doesn't feel that way about all people.
Right.
Yeah. So describe a setting, like how did it unfold?
So first we started with some sight words, and it was trying to memorize some sight words. Then it was sounding out words as well, simple words. And then it was, the way I teach reading is reading through books. I do sight words too, but mainly it's reading through books. So they learn the words that are in the books. And we started with Dr. Seuss, and we just kept reading until he was able to read them.
Now, there's been a raging debate, and I think the tide has turned, the pendulum has swung from visual learning to phonetics. And I think phonetics has won that battle. And from your experience, especially with special needs kids, would you reiterate that not phonetics, phonics?
Yeah.
Phonics is the way to do it.
Yeah. He was reading by memory before.
Okay,
and
this is, I think, a key point.
I taught him how to sound out the words. He would sound out the beginning of the word, and then he wouldn't sound out the end of the word. So I got it so that he would sound out the whole word. So not every word can you sound out, but it's important to have that skill and then to know your sight words too. So there were certain words, like he could say mountain. Now that's not, you can't sound out mountain, but he was able to recognize mountain.
Moyutain. Well, English is one of the worst languages when it comes to that. I'm familiar with my native Hungarian. Most people don't know Hungarian too well, but suffice to say, based on my own expert opinion of N of one, I grew up speaking Hungarian in a Hungarian household. And Hungarian is one of those entirely phonetic languages. The way it's written is the way it's said. Korean is like that. Hangul was deliberately written for opposite reasons as Chinese. Chinese was deliberately pictographic, so the peasants cannot learn. You need to study the language with thousands of symbols for years and years before you're even literate. That, I believe, was almost deliberate to keep the proles from having the power of literacy. I digress. But Hangul was developed with the express purpose of making literacy universal. And now, as we know, English is this maddening composite of so many different languages, kind of a Germanic root with French, with all sorts of stuff thrown in there. So it's not, you don't say it like it sounds. But if you take a phonics approach, at least initially, and then augment it obviously with the visuals, then you're making progress. I just think this is interesting. Obviously, this is not a study, and we're not offering definitive evidence one way or another. But based on your experience, phonics is the way to create a foundation for a child, and then you augment that obviously with
kind of at the same time you're doing the sight words, because as you're reading books, I would say, this is one you can sound out, or no, this one you've got to just learn. So I was teaching both at the same time. It's not exclusively one or the other. It's a combination of both.
That's very, very interesting. And then parental involvement, I believe, would be more intense, or it would have to be more intense if you're doing this virtually, for example, through Zoom. So since the pandemic, what I call one of the pandemic silver linings is the ubiquity of the acceptance of virtual meetings. This has to do with everything from business meetings to doctor's appointments, telemedicine, and it's impacted pedagogy as well, I'm assuming, where more and more parents and kids have gotten more comfortable to the point where you could have a Zoom call.
Yes. Well, the first special needs student that I had on Zoom was during the pandemic, and she was what some would not consider special needs, but it's definitely a special needs category, which is GATE. She's high genius level. I mean, just 4-year-old, just amazing.
So what is it? GATE?
GATE, gifted and talented education.
Okay, excellent.
So she would qualify for that beyond a doubt. I mean, just brightest little girl. So I taught her how to read.
How old?
4.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's learning how to read.
Little prodigy. Right?
Yeah. And
Einstein, by the way, couldn't even speak before the age of 5. This is not apocryphal story. It's true. And they thought he was autistic. Personally, I think Al just didn't have anything to say, but please proceed.
So with her, I needed her mom to sit next to her while she was writing and tell me like what she was writing, if she was writing what I was telling her to write. Because we were learning how to write first letters, then words, and then sentences. And so her mom would be there, and also her mom would or dad would sometimes be there too. Um, they would need to make sure that she stayed on task because highly bright individuals get bored easily too. So they would be there in proximity to make sure she was engaging in the lesson. And I would do my best to engage her, but across the screen, there's only so much I can do. I do need a person physically there to ensure that they're not just up and going to leave the room for no reason.
And also for certain special needs categories, I would assume it's exacerbated by restlessness or
Yes.
inattentiveness, especially for ADHD,
Mm,
anxiety. And again, when you're dealing with ASD children, their ability to emotionally relate to other humans is sometimes problematic. So I'm assuming that would be exacerbated if you're just a human
right.
on a screen, like they have trouble reading your facial expressions and translating that into emotional states. So it's hard enough in person, let alone if you're two-dimensional on a screen.
Yes. For example, one parent and student combination I had, the session went really well. It was an introductory session, and but at the end the father said, "Yeah, but I had to stay in the room the whole time and make sure he didn't leave." Now, to me that seems like a minor adjustment that a parent would have to make because he really wasn't that involved in the lesson except for a couple times I remember him saying, "Okay, now focus on Michelle." But there was no he didn't have to do any of the teaching. I did all the teaching. He just did a little bit of the behavior management because I can't physically be there. So, in that setting, I do need some parental help, but once a week for an hour or twice a week, I personally recommend twice a week. You do get the best results twice a week for an hour. And you get the results fastest. And also with my ESL kids, I do reading and writing together. I find that the best way to teach someone how to write is to teach them how to read reading and comprehend what they're reading.
Yeah, bravo, bravo to that. Going back to the father though, it sounded like he complained a little bit. He was
Yes.
like, come on, I gotta be here. I'm paying you. I'm paying you to teach my kid. So why do I even need to participate? Then you got him to participate, at least from the vantage point of helping to maintain that focus. Bravo. But that brings up another broader point about our American attitude toward education overall. So it's plug and play. It's like we pay our taxes, and if you send your child to a private school, then you pay twice. You pay taxes and you pay the private school. Now, that also has been a political hot potato and it's evolving as we speak. But the point I'm making is that you pay and then others play. So I'm paying my taxes, and in some cases, I'm paying double, triple with private education on top of the taxes I pay. And you guys got this, right? I'm busy. I got work, I got my life. And there's this tacit understanding that it's a non-participatory activity, that education takes place outside the fold of parenting, direct parenting, and parenting influence. But this varies culturally. So, for example, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Asians in general tend to excel academically. And don't take my word for it. Take a look at the latest entrance statistics for Harvard, the Ivy League, most of the top schools. I believe, and again, this isn't too much of a stretch, that a big reason that Asians as a category exceed some of the other segments within our society is because their parents are actively involved in the education of their children. This becomes not just about education, but it's about moving the whole family forward in terms of living that American dream, getting the most out of society. And to verify that, many emigre families, first
Mhm.
generation folks, are particularly motivated
Yeah.
to oversee their child's education through active participation. Now, this is a mixed blessing, a double-edged sword, of course. But at the same time, it reinforces what you're saying is that there needs to be some effort on the part of parents to, at the very least, provide positive reinforcement and a structure and an incentive for their children to flourish in school.
Right. That severely autistic kid that I taught to read, his parents were reading with him every night. Once he was able to read on his own a little bit, they read with him every night before going to bed. Even if it was just a few pages, they'd read for like 15 minutes. But they did that every night in addition to my once a week.
Yeah. Yeah. And many of the prodigies, like you mentioned, Terence Tao, who was one of the foremost analytical mathematicians on the planet from UCLA, his parents recognized early that he had tremendous ability and were active participants from the age of 3, I believe. Now, clearly, he displayed miraculous gifts. Again, he is arguably the top mathematician on the earth that we know of. But the list goes on and on for folks who are successful, and especially when they're successful early. They had a nurturing, supportive home who recognized that ability and then brought in additional resources, much like yourself, to supplement the genius that was already there. And I think that that's an interesting way of looking at pedagogy overall, that if Terry Tao could use all the help he could get early on, imagine someone in the opposite boat who has learning disadvantages, some kind of condition that precludes them even hitting par without extra help.
Right.
So okay, so you've displayed this prowess with special needs kids, and you apply your own methodology, which sounds like fairly standard methodology, but with tender, loving care.
It's what I learned in my teaching credential program and what I've learned working in small groups. I also should mention, as an instructional assistant, I worked in intervention, which is where students are pulled from their classroom. They're not quite eligible for special education services, but they're below grade level. And so I saw what they did for reading comprehension in those programs, and I incorporate that into my teaching as well.
That's terrific, and I think the proof is in your relationship with the kids and the families. I understand you have one family that you've been tutoring their twin daughters for how many years?
Well, I started during the pandemic and when they were in second grade. They just graduated sixth grade now, so for several years. Then I've got another student that I started when she was in sixth grade, and she's going into college now. And with her, I do work with reading comprehension and writing. And we've been working on that since she was in sixth grade. And that's probably one of the first students that I tried out the audiobooks with. Well, she might have been the second one, but the audiobooks help her. She's not diagnosed with any disability per se, but she definitely has problems with reading comprehension and has always sort of missed it, but now she understands it, but she misses the big picture. So what we do is we both read the book and we talk about the themes, and we talk about it on a higher level than I would with the younger kid.
So how does it work with audiobooks? So you'll play a clip of let's say you're reading a book and you're on chapter 5. And do you first listen together to a part of the book? Do you ask the child to listen to the book before the session?
Yes.
How does it work?
So they listen to the book on their own while they're reading. So in order for tutoring to work, they need to practice the skills. So we can't just read for an hour. They've got to be reading on their own too. So they'll read the book, I'll read the book, and then we talk about it if we're working on reading comprehension, and then we'll read some together. So like this was when she was doing books for school. So if we were only doing an hour a week, there'd be no way she'd get through the entire book. So she'd have to read some of it on her own. And we'd talk about the themes and the deeper meaning behind it, and also just comprehension questions too, to make sure she was getting the main points. So we'd talk about it, but she had to do the reading on her own, as well as then we'd read a small portion and I'd be able to ask her questions while we were together.
So part of the homework is actually sitting back and listening to the book.
Yes, she would listen to it and read along with it. She did this with several different books.
I think that that's a wonderful idea. And now that we're in the age of audiobooks, I was just reading statistics that folks reading audiobooks, listening to audiobooks is not surpassing regular reading, but it's astonishing how it's creeping up on regular reading. And people are listening to audiobooks while they're doing other things akin to podcasting. And it's taken on a life of its own in ways that are exciting. And I think what you're saying is it's not any kind of detriment to the reading or understanding or learning process, that it's another faculty, it's another way of understanding and engaging with the content.
And some of these online textbooks have the capability of read to you. So, for example, I'm working with an online student who has ADHD, and she has online classes. And so her textbook is online. Well, she can push the little speaker button and it reads to her. And I recommend her always doing that, even if she's reading long, because there's something about hearing the words that helps, especially people with special needs, understand the book better.
Yeah, and I've read a lot on how technology has been used with special needs kids and also handicapped individuals, people who have problems with hearing, blind people. Technology has stepped in as a supplement to help them navigate the world, but also learn and engage with content in ways that were never thought possible before. And this seems like kind of a mild extension of that, where they're listening to the content. They're actually able to create an audio version of what they're reading in real time too, and engage with it that way. And lastly, it's also reflective of our current technology. AI is now taking over the world, and obviously ChatGPT and all of its cousins have a voice feature. And then we have the Alexas and Siris, which are still trying to catch up to the other modalities in terms of their own comprehension and accuracy. But we are headed toward a world away from text and away from reading and writing. And I would hope that reading and writing never go away. I'm a passionate reader and writer, but I'm also realistic that technology has reached the point where it almost makes reading and writing redundant or almost in the way. And that, I think, is terrifying, but it's also a healthy kind of development, because end of the day, what has technology done? It's enabled people to reproduce two people sitting in a cave or out on the savannah, communicating with each other. And it got progressively more difficult to do if you want to save the information, or if you want information to go from one generation to the next in terms of translating the learnings of the tribe. And now we just take it for granted that we've had writing for years with the Gutenberg press. It was mass produced and available. But when you go all the way back to the hieroglyphs and cuneiforms, it was a way of capturing human conversation and information in real time, but in a way that was beyond time, right? It was saved information. And now with technology, it's become a little bit redundant, right? You can just talk to your bot talks to you. But until that happens, we need people to learn how to read and
Right.
write.
I should mention too, one of the tools that they use in school with children with special needs, typing is very difficult for them.
Right, that's
So
a great point. Right.
they do text to type as a technology, and I think that's very helpful. Rather than having them struggle to try to find the keys on the keyboard, they talk into the computer and it types it out for them.
I think that's wonderful too. And you could say that that's a harbinger of the end of humanity where no one can even type or write anymore. But once again, I think that these trend lines are inevitable. And what's fascinating is that these interim steps are enabling folks with special needs to catch up to their peers and really get on par with getting an education. And folks like you are helpful for them to do that, not only because you are applying these techniques, but this is the second part of the conversation, which is just showing empathy, like showing that someone actually cares and is willing to spend the time and energy to improve their lives and to focus on them. I'm assuming that that's a big part of your success as well.
Yes, being able to relate because I didn't struggle in school really, but I tried real hard. So math didn't come extremely easy, but with all my subjects, I tried real hard. So I was always busy studying. So I get the struggle of, and I think math I did struggle with. Like I had to, especially with fractions, I had to teach myself how to do fractions. So I understand what the frustration. And it's still numbers in my head aren't the greatest. I do tutor in math too, but I always tell the students I've got to write the problem down. The numbers in my head, I just don't see them. And that and I think that's how I can relate to special needs too. There are certain limitations and you have to work around them rather than try and fight against them.
Yeah, and I think you're illustrating the deep significance of personalized instruction, personalized education. Each human learns differently. They prefer different modalities for learning, and they have different ways of just processing information. Just to go back to the extreme case, Terry Tao, I mentioned him, the UCLA transcendent mathematics genius. He admits that his geometry is not great. He's an analytical mathematician in that he loves to figure out problems, but he doesn't visualize the problems. Now, there's an entire branch of geometric mathematics, of the visualization of mathematics, and a lot of it was integral to the development of mathematics. When you see pi in all these equations and you wonder how the hell did the ratio of the radius to the circumference of a circle get into this weird analytical thing, because branches of mathematics are intimately connected to each other. But Terry Tao admits that it's hard for him. Terry Tao does not have a visual brain, and he has a hard time articulating how he does what he does because it's this deep mathematical analytical intuition. So take just a regular person. They've got their own peccadillos and predilections and ways of learning and ways of communicating and ways of absorbing. And by you showing up and listening and understanding their unique way of processing information and also emotionally relating to an instructor, to me, that sounds like 90% of the battle right there is simply adjusting what would otherwise be a generic methodology to the unique needs of each student. And just to put a capper on that, I think that's the number one problem with our educational system overall. If we're finding out anything now with this AI business, it's like when you apply machine learning, we're discovering more and more that human beings are different. We knew that from the beginning, but we're different in endless and deep ways that we never thought possible. The more information we get about people, the more we realize how subtly different we are in terms of how we communicate, our needs, our desires.
Right.
And when you're teaching somebody, you got to spend time to be sensitive to that. And our educational system does a terrible job with just standardized testing. By definition, is a travesty of human education.
Yes. And unfortunately, we've moved towards standardized testing, teaching to the standardized test because that's where the money comes from. You get such and such a score, you get more money from the government. And that's the way the system working. So, and you also get more recognition from your principal. You're expected to get a certain score. It's really ridiculous. One thing I should mention too, with this individualized instruction, I do use some of the techniques that they use in the special education classrooms because I substitute special education. So I've seen things like there's this way of addition where you have dots on each of the numbers. Touch math, they call it. So I do know how to do touch math, but what I don't think touch math is particularly effective with, especially with big numbers, because they have this different sign that you've got to tap it twice to count it. So there's a dot for, like, say it's 1 plus 2. The one would have one dot on it and the two would have two dots on it. But if it's a number like 6, each dot would count for two dots. It would count for 2 times you count it. And so it might only have 3 dots, but it's a different type of dot, and each dot you count twice. So to me, that's pretty confusing.
Yeah, it's almost like you've created, like, the scaffolding for building a building is more complicated and intricate than the facade of the building that you're constructing.
Right. But
Right?
things like using the number line to use addition, that works.
That works very well.
Yeah, and using manipulatives, that works. So I kind of take what works and what I've seen doesn't work from the special education curriculum and combine it with what works and what does not work from the general ed curriculum and make my own specialized towards what the student needs.
Yeah, yeah. And then going back to AI, just to be Pollyanna about it, I see a potential world where each child is analyzed based on their biochemistry and based on their behavior and their response mechanisms, for a schooling and a methodology that just innately works better for them. And I think that that would be a nice thing rather than this generic approach to the student pumped into a system where it's lowest common denominator, where it's mass production of something that is deeply individual. And I think many of the problems that we have that trickle into all of our society. I mean, frankly, the American understanding of history, of civics, of culture, come on, people. And we could trace all of this back to a broken and dysfunctional educational system at its core that's pumping out ignorant Americans who just don't know better. And this comes across every category from critical thinking to basic knowledge of science, the world, other cultures. It's disastrous, folks. And that's another reason it's wonderful talking to Michelle, in that she reinforces some of these deep intuitions about what works instead of what's broken. And I don't think it's a rocket science newsflash. I just think it's a reminder that some of the most basic practices having to do with personalizing the approach, being empathetic, paying attention to students, goes a long, long way. And other countries, this is the last part of this part of my harangue, they get it a little bit more, at least in terms of educating their populations to have skills.
Well, one thing that I know in Europe, what they do is up until high school, you're all getting the same curriculum. But then at high school, you either go to trade school or you go to college prep school. and you take a test, and some people say that's not fair because you're taking a test to determine what type of job you're going into, but I think it's using your skills, and maybe not everyone is cut out to be on the college track. I think some people are more suited for the trades, and I think that's just as good of an option as the college track, and I think that needs to be encouraged more. So in high school, they're getting different learning based on what they tested in.
Yeah. And I would add on to that that I think the American middle class has been bamboozled and, in a sense, blackmailed by the academy with this notion that the American dream is only possible with a college education. And then graft onto that a humanities education. So for $60,000 a year, your child can smoke dope and hang out so that they could find themselves. Well, I think that that is a false promise worthy of its own podcast, many podcasts, but I would agree very much that our educational system isn't just flawed at its very roots, but it's producing these rotten fruit of false promises and wasted time and money. And we have a deficiency in our culture and in our country of even basic skills, which can lead to lucrative careers and happy lives. And along the way, we're pumping out the humanities zombies who can't get a job, and they are taught nothing except how to appease professors and party on weekends.
And I should mention there is actually college for special needs students where they're taught practical skills to be able to survive independently. My cousin is going to one of these at a UC school, UCLA, in fact. He's starting in the fall, and he's so excited to be able to live in the dorms and have this college experience, but it's going to be tailored to his needs. They're not going to be teaching him business classes. They're going to be teaching him practical things so that he can live independently, or as independently as possible, earning a living, having a place, and all the life skills needed as an adult.
Absolutely. And that's an extension of this personalization theme that we're sharing, which is cater the education to the student instead of the student to the generic educational system. And I've heard and read about countless stories of severely autistic people who otherwise would be written off as a basket case and a dependent on society, who flourish, who thrive in environments which other folks might find just hell on earth, whether there's the embrace of repetition, whether there's obsessive fixation on detail.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the savants as well, who are terrific with numbers. And if you work in IT, you realize that there's many, many ASD folks who are gainfully employed and I have to say, keep the world running because the ASD person with the manic focus and attention to detail create a lot of the code, folks, that's running this app and keeping the world moving. So this isn't a newsflash, but it's a reminder that education needs to be personal. And here's the other point I think that you're making: practical.
Yes. And the goals need to be realistic. That student I taught how to read, the severely autistic one, he is reading at a third grade level now, and his parents are just gushing with pride. Some people would be disappointed he's not at grade level, but he's literate. He can function in society at a third grade reading level. He can fill out forms. He can function. That's all they wanted for him, was to be able to read so he could contribute to society in the best way that he could, and he could interact and read street signs and forms and things like that. Not necessarily the great American novel, but just to be able to get by in society.
Yeah, it's what do they say, that happiness is the delta between expectation and reality. So, set your sights with realistic, pragmatic goals and then attain them. And then live a happy life, not based on comparing oneself to others in completely different categories of human existence, but based on your own needs and your own expectations and capabilities. And that goes back to even the classical Greek definition of justice, that everybody does what they're naturally inclined to do. And I think that that's a celebration of pedagogy. It's a celebration of all students in terms of realizing their own personal potential.
Right. And there was time for high expectations. There was another student with autism. He's more on the what they would refer to in the past as Asperger's, but he couldn't comprehend anything he was reading. He would just read it and have no recollection of what he was reading. Well, now he can comprehend, and he's getting straight A's as he goes into high school. I tutored him for about 3 years, and by the end, he was getting straight A's. And that is amazing. And his parents had those high expectations for him, but they were realistic.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good point. There needs to be a balance between hitting the gas and not forcing, but encouraging people to realize that potential, and overdoing it in the sense either of false expectations or improper comparisons, and then just floundering in disappointment and discouragement and giving up. And one theme that I'm hearing loud and clear is that instead of giving up on students who display chronic, air quote, difficulties in the learning process, the problem might not be with the student, but with the system, with the methodology applied to educate them, maybe even the circumstances of their education.
Yes, the one student with obsessive compulsive disorder, he needed to get some of his what they call tics out in order to be able to work. So we would have like a little break where he would just be able to do his repetitive motions, and then he'd be able to focus again.
That's brilliant. So you just let it's almost like he had a quotient or a quota of ticks. So you let him tick out,
Mm-hmm.
and then he'll be able to focus a little bit.
Yeah.
Then the ticks build up in his tick tank. Then he's got to let it out again, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think you're reiterating that this kid was a tick kid. So another kid might be a Pokemon kid. Another
Right.
kid might be a whatever kid, but just know the kid that you're dealing with. Accommodate best you can and create an environment of comfort instead of conflict. And then you could presumably bring out the best.
And that brings up a point for another thing I do for parents is help them to advocate for their children within the education system. I tell them things that when they go into the 504 meetings that they can ask for, like a note taker, extra time on tests, a different location for tests. There's depending on the needs of the student, open note tests.
And by 504, you mean this is the special needs?
So 504 is different than IEP. 504 is
IEP?
So IEP is individualized educational plan.
Okay.
And that's for kids with a diagnosed learning disability. 504 is more for kids with things like ADHD or obsessive compulsive disorder or some other often medical condition that's not a learning disability.
Okay, so the IEP is related to cognitive.
It's a diagnosed learning disability.
Diagnosed learning disability. They have trouble learning, period.
Yeah.
And then the 504, you can almost consider these comorbidities of that, which is like if they're restless and they can't focus, then they can't learn.
Right. But you'd also have a 504 for someone like a kid with diabetes to make sure that they're able to eat in class.
Right, because if
So,
their A1C level is going through the
yes.
roof, then they're not exactly going to be able to concentrate on their lesson.
Right. Well,
So,
and
yeah.
they can even pass out.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. They could
the
die
yeah.
from, yeah.
Yeah, so it needs to be written in a legally binding plan. Both of those, both of them are legally binding, but there's one that goes through the special education department, and the 504 is often a doctor's note that the parent brings in
Right.
and
So
advocates for.
what you're suggesting is that parents of children throughout this spectrum or this range of IEP/504, many parents don't know that there are resources that they can tap into within the existing educational system in public schools that can facilitate better
Yes.
learning conditions for their kids.
Right, because I'm only there once a week, maybe twice a week to help out, but they need help daily on things like, as I said, note taking. Some cannot listen and copy down notes, and the teacher's not writing everything on the board. And a lot of students are able to copy notes, but for a special needs kid, especially one with ADHD, note taking is very difficult. So the teacher has a copy of those notes, make a photocopy, give it to the student. It's not hard.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's existing systems that are in place that can be augmented, tweaked to better accommodate special needs kids, and parents should be made aware of these. If they're not aware of them, then they should ask. And then once they're made aware of them or they ask, then they can be applied to their own child, whether they're a diabetic child, an ADHD child, even an IEP child, to take advantage of resources that are already there. And it's often all it really takes is a little bit more, back to the beginning of our conversation, parent interest. Become vested in your child to the point where it's not just looking at their report card after every quarter or semester and saying out loud, oh my God, it's being part of their curricula, if you will. You help them out, you inquire, you wonder how they're doing, and then you facilitate and encourage them to get access to all the resources that are already there. Our system is broken, it is flawed, but we spend billions of dollars, and these issues have been raised and they've been addressed in systems that can actually be helpful.
Right. And I even work with the students, assuming that they know that they have a 504 plan. They're older. Like I tutored one today and I said, tell your teacher that you are allowed to have notes available to you during your quiz, open note quiz based on your 504 plan. They may not be aware because the school is still looking at the 504 plan, but go to the teacher directly and get the teacher involved in looking at this 504 plan that's in the process of being evaluated from one school to the next to make sure she can, on this first quiz, use her notes because it says it's academic plagiarism if they go to the book during the quiz to get answers. Well, she's allowed to, so I want to make sure she's able to have this tool because she's not as good at remembering things, but who doesn't look up things on Google? It's not a drawback to be able to look up things on a quiz if that's what you need to be able to pass the quiz.
Yeah, and then it gets to the heart of how learning takes place, what learning's all about. And it also raises the AI flag again, which I have to ask. Do you use the large language models in any of their forms with your students to help educate them, help them write an essay, help them look stuff up?
Not write an essay. I don't use it for writing at all, but looking stuff up. I've started using ChatGPT with some of my older students, but definitely not with writing because they'll use it to just plagiarize the whole thing because it's much easier than just writing it yourself. But to look up information and ask questions, definitely it's a good tool for students for that. But I don't think at this point it's a good tool for writing. I do teach writing, and I teach a very logical approach to writing with the same that they teach in the Irvine Unified School District. I use that one, but it's also, I noticed that it's the same one I was teaching when I was teaching biology back in 2010, just different name for it, the Jane Schaefer method.
Is that thesis statement
Yes.
supporting? I had
well, not supporting. So it's thesis or claim, depending on what you call it, or introduction, or answer the question. You can call it any of those things. Then you cite evidence, then you explain that evidence, and then you conclude.
Yeah, and then the paragraph structure should reiterate that, which is open with the thesis.
Well, that's with the paragraph. That's a one
paragraph style, and then this could be extrapolated into multi-paragraphs where you have the opening thesis, and then kind of the introductory paragraph goes from general to specific. It's deductive, and then the closing paragraph is inductive. It kind of summarizes where you're at, and then generalizes the thing. I had only a handful of teachers throughout my scattered and slipshod education, and one of them in particular from middle school, and I've even ranted on a podcast about her, I got the most from. And she taught me that structure, and she asked us to read essays and articles in Time magazine back in the day. This is in the prehistoric, pre-digital age. And she forced us to destroy the passive voice in our writing. It is, there is, it was, there was. I have also similarly ranted against that. And she's the greatest teacher I've ever had. I remember her, how she looked. She's on the shorter side. She had short brunette hair. I don't remember her name. But I want to bestow sainthood upon her because she cut through the BS and she nailed it. Yeah. And she instilled in me a few simple key habits that to this day are part of my writer's vocabulary, both stylistically and in terms of just the overall strategy that I approached. Clear, succinct, actionable, and no extraneous words. And I love her. I just want to thank her. I don't know if she's still alive, but she's a goddess. And she was very matter of fact. She was really kind of mean. And I'm thankful for her because years of going in and out of classes, there was always this wishy-washy ambiguity. And sometimes you really just need to lay down the law and show there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way. And I know I've been talking about personalization, and I know we've got, the Montessori school. I don't want to knock that company. But you have different ways of teaching where it's laissez-faire, where you just throw kids into a garden and feed them a nice lunch, and they will learn, they will self-teach the secrets of the universe. But I think what we need to emphasize in addition to this personalized approach is that some things work and some things don't. And you really, really need to hit home what works. And you could tweak things with each individual student. But you know what? Thesis statements, supporting statements. And if you use it is, it was, there was, then you're going to be banished to writer's hell. I even wrote John McWhorter, the New York Times columnist and Columbia professor, an email. Needless to say, he didn't respond. He does it. And he is a self-proclaimed and acknowledged expert in language, in the use of language. Shame on you, John McWhorter. It was, it is. So anyway, that's my little rant on the proper use of language and the proper way to do things, seen within the broader context of giving students freedom and letting them go and letting them loose to discover truth for themselves. So that's kind of wild, and it's awesome that your students have you and your parents have you who bring. It seems to me if we would summarize it, it's a combination of empathy, patience. Empathy and patience are the real strengths here.
Yes.
And then for extra points, you've got methodologies. So you've got a toolkit of methodologies that you apply based on who the student is.
Yes.
So
And you mentioned who your teacher was that taught you how to write. My teachers that taught me how to write were teachers that taught me how to write for the AP exam, the advanced placement exam. So I had one in history, Mrs. Hooper, and then I had one in English, Mrs. Hillinger. And both of them, one had Mrs. Hooper had a stamp. She used it on my paper quite a bit at first, verbose.
yes,
And
yes,
she just had a stamp. She didn't even write verbose. She had a stamp that said verbose, and it would be on my paper, and I'd realize I had to be more concise. Because the thing is, these exams are graded very quickly, so you got to get to your point right away. Got to get to the point, support the point, conclude it. So I learned how to write from them, and I used that same writing style when writing my PhD thesis.
yes. And it's especially true now with attention spans plummeting, and we're in a digital age. We're all digital natives in a sense, where it's immediacy and intensity. And it also harkens back to just being clear, being actionable, because you're making the most sense if you could just get to the point. And redundancy and ambiguity is the road to ruin, because that's the BS engine that our society is becoming more and more entranced by. So Einstein, I believe, was the one who said that if you can't clearly express an idea in a sentence or two, then you know it's wrong. So dial it back. And this tendency to students, I know this. I mean, I did it. We all did it. You write a 500-word essay by Monday. You're just filling that page. You're not writing to communicate anything. You're writing to just get the task done. And that begs the question of everything we're talking about being on point and succinct. So,
Right. And in the reverse, I do that with reading too. I, as I'm reading with students, I'll stop page by page and ask them questions about each page to make sure they're understanding what's going on, whether it be a vocabulary word, especially if it's a word they stumble on. I'll ask them if they know what it means. And if it doesn't, I'll usually supply them with it so that they can with the answer. And then as they get a little older, I have them start looking it up. But first, with the younger ones, I just tell them what it means. And then we use it in the sentence, like replace the word with the definition in the sentence so the sentence makes sense. And
yeah.
then that's part of the reason with reading comprehension, especially with English as a second language students, the comprehension is so low is because the vocabulary is not there. So you
Yeah.
got to, and the only way to build vocabulary, in my opinion, is to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is teachable. We can teach the machines to do it. So Chat GPT is generative pre-trained transformer. It's generative. It generates content. It relies on pre-training of models, which is basically all the information that's on the internet all crunched up. And it's a transformer. And the transformer transforms literally your prompt or query into an output, which seems like magic. But at the tail end of the transformer process, after it cobbles together all the tokenized content related to your query, and each token is assigned a relationship to other tokens. That's how this technology works. It uses matrix math to tie these tokens together, but then it forces it into a template. So, and that template at the end of the transformer process, after it cobbles together the stuff, makes it consistent, and it makes it like the human language and the writing that we're familiar with. So there's almost a chat GPT ease, you know what I mean? It's like a language now, and it's becoming, in a sense, recognizable. But what it does very, very well is it's reflective of, are you ready for it? Good writing. It's succinct, it's direct, it's actionable. There's no extra words in a chat GPT essay that you ask it to create, because at the end of that transformer process, it's like, get out of here with this stuff. It's going to be consistent along the lines of what you were describing earlier: thesis statement, supporting arguments, summary. So after it does all of its stuff, it's going to be a bit wishy-washy. And it doesn't allow the result to be wishy-washy, because the final filter that it puts on that transformer are the rules of the road. Fit that semi-mess that you've just cobbled together into this structure. And it'll do that in a nanosecond. So the good news, I think, of this AI revolution, aside from potentially destroying the planet and before then taking away all our jobs, is to teach people what good writing is. This is an aspect of this whole LLM thing that I don't think people talk about at all, which is the good news here. Is it's the frontier models, at least by example, show us that, look, kids, that's a good essay. Right. And that in itself, I think, could be educational, even though they cheat.
Yeah, but I do a lot of modeling for the students when I'm writing with them, especially if they get stuck, or I give them sentence starters or sentence frames, and they work with those. So I do the modeling with them rather than using ChatGPT.
Excellent. I'm not advocating that you should use ChatGPT, and I am cognizant of its threats. And it's already been damaging in terms of people not learning the basics and just faking it. That's a given. But I think the good news is, though, that the brains behind the LLMs recognize that the way these things can be effective is by adopting our best practices and not our worst. At least for now, folks. So we'll see how this all shakes out. Talk for a second about your academic background, because this is another side of your story, which I think is very, very compelling and educational in its own way. So once again, you have a doctorate.
Yes, I have a doctorate in plant pathology, and the reason I got it was I went into it thinking I would be a professor. And then I looked at it and decided I didn't want to do the research. So I was going to teach at a community college. And then I learned that most community college professors work part-time before they get full-time appointments. And I wasn't going to be able to sustain myself on a part-time job. So I looked at so as I'm doing my PhD, I basically did the PhD because I wanted to learn more about fungi. I was really, one of my last classes in college was on fungi, and I loved it.
So you are an official geek.
Yes, yes.
I don't know. Is it a geek or a dork? People argue whether you're a dork or a geek, but you're a fellow geek.
Yes, yes.
Dork. So you went to pursue a doctorate because you thought fungi were badass.
Yeah, mycology course, they just looked so pretty under the microscope. The fungi I fell in love with looking at them under the microscope, and I wanted to learn more about them than the one college course I had. So, and it turned out that a lot of the mycologists were plant pathologists because they studied fungal diseases of plants. So that's where I found the mycologists, and I went to get my PhD, went through the whole process, and at the end of my PhD, as I was starting to look at jobs, I realized the job I really wanted to do, again, it all centers on teaching. If you noticed, I wanted to be a professor, but then I decided that wasn't for me. Then the last form of teaching I wanted to do was I wanted to teach farmers how to grow crops, because that's what I was not a lab like bench worker as much as a field worker. We would bring things in from the field and analyze them in the lab. But um, there's two types of plant pathologists. One is more molecular and one is more fieldwork. I was fieldwork plant pathologist. So the job I envisioned was as a farm advisor. So I would be the UC's bridge to the farmer in how to grow crops based on research methods and what fungicides to use and um, different techniques to grow crops disease free.
So to summarize, you got into this because you thought fungi look cool underneath the microscope. And from pragmatic terms, you realized that a source of damage to crops, compromising productivity in farms, had a lot to do with the microbiome.
Yeah.
You had invaders coming in and decimating crops.
Though unfortunately, insects are a bigger problem. But I was doing the fungi. But I did learn about I did learn about the insects too. So as a farm advisor, I would have been able to say, "Oh no, this is an insect problem," and then bring an entomologist in. But I did take a field entomology course. I think I took two different entomology. I took a field entomology course and an entomology classification course so that I would be able to be a farm advisor.
Right. So in the infinite multiverse, you are a farm advisor for crops. But in this universe, within the multiverse, you are a personal tutor and substitute teacher. So tell us about the delta between these two universes.
Okay, well, what happened was I was working in a male-dominated field. So of course I'm out with the male professor and he's showing me we're on this field trip and he's introducing me to all the different people that I might potentially be employed by or different people I might work with. And after a long day of being out in the field, we go for a dinner and he has a glass of wine. I'm driving, so I don't drink. I was over 21. I was about 23 at the time. I'm 23, he's 80. So he's past retirement age, but he really knowledgeable. I highly admired him. That's important to the story. And so we finish eating, get back in the car. I'm wearing shorts, another important point. As I'm driving, he puts his hand on my leg. And now I'm frozen. I don't know what to do because I don't have a voice because he's in this position of power. And as we learned in the Me Too movement, it's often in this position of power, you freeze up and you're defenseless. Like you don't, one, it was out of the, I didn't see it coming. Now, if it was like on a date, then you know how to handle a situation. But like, this is someone I respect and you don't want to offend him. You don't want to jeopardize your position. And at the same time, I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. And luckily he picked up on some signal or something and took his hand away and we finished driving in silence and it was awful. But we got back to the school and went our separate ways. But anyways, how that affected my career choice was he was the one that was introducing me to all these potential employers or not the employers, but the people that would be that I would be working with. And he would also be on the committee, the hiring committee. And I didn't want to get the job based on my looks. I was feeling that's what I was. So I was confused as to, am I getting it based on my looks? And also there was this deep sense of betrayal. And I didn't want anything to do with the job that he had given me, was the way I was looking at it. And I didn't want to move because I was in a relationship at the time. And again, that's part of the gender thing that comes into it too. I being like I valued the relationship and wanted that to continue. So I didn't want to move. So I started to look at who I was as a person and I kept on saying, I kept going back to the teaching. well, why don't I just be a teacher? That's what I want to do. So I got my teaching credential in multiple subjects. Unfortunately, there were not elementary school teaching jobs at the time. There was too many people teaching in the Riverside area, so I got a job in middle school, and that worked okay for a couple of years. And then I got a job in high school because again, there's a great need for math and science
Okay, hold on
teachers.
a second. We're segueing
Okay.
into the latter part of your career, which was precipitated by this unpleasant experience
Yeah.
with a mentor. You had your microbiology Yoda. And this individual whom you describe, he was 80 years old at the time. You were
Married.
you were a 23-year-old, and you looked up to him, and he was again your mentor and your inspiration. He was also a conduit potentially to opportunities in that field, which is the essence of the academy, right?
Yeah.
The senior professor, the lab leader, they open and close doors for everyone who works with them, but really for them. And this happened. You had an instance happen, and you felt violated, and that destroyed the dynamic of the relationship.
Yes.
The trust was eliminated, and you felt that you were being manipulated.
Yeah.
And that soured you to the whole situation.
Yeah. And it wasn't something like I blew something out of proportion. He knew by my reaction he'd done something wrong, and he wrote me a note. And in the note it said he was then trying to get me to go to Washington D.C. with him or something on this plane, and we'd sit on opposite sides of the plane and I wouldn't have to talk to him. It was very bizarre, this note he wrote. But it was clear that
So he was defensive, and I am guessing, I don't need to guess, but there's 100% probability that he did the same thing to other students.
Yes, including after me. I warned one of my friends about him, and she actually got it worse than I did because he touched her on her breast at dinner, and I mean, just totally inappropriate. But I did tell her my story, but she didn't believe me. I mean, even another woman didn't believe me. Um, so of course I didn't tell anyone. I told my immediate professor, the professor who's my major professor, that I worked in his lab, and one good thing came out of it. There was a visiting professor that was applying for a job, and she was going to go with this professor in the car alone, and my professor sent another person in that car with her. So that is one good thing that came out of it, but there was no other consequence.
Yeah, so I think your story is evocative. It's not like anyone's never heard this before, but I think it's integral to your personal story. And we live now in an age of backlash to the backlash to the backlash of Me Too, of what's considered woke, of a long list of societal reactions to not good things. Racism, misogyny, homophobia, the list goes on and on for people being bad to each other, treating each other badly. And now, my intent is not to politicize this conversation, but to illustrate how the time we're living in right now, stories like yours have again become downplayed and marginalized and often dismissed. So I think you bringing it up again is good because we're in a time right now where our country never experienced any of these things apparently. And we're rewriting the rewritten history. And I think it's important to provide some context that there is such a thing as systemic abuse, and that science is a patriarchal, male-dominated field.
Well, especially what I was with the farmers. I mean, there just weren't too many women. But I must say though, I've got two friends from that department that both become professors in their countries that are male-dominated countries one in Mexico and one in Taiwan. And they're both professors. And I think that's a huge achievement that they did that in male dominated
Oh,
countries.
enormously. If we think and know that our society is macho, patriarchal, it's nothing compared to Mexico and a lot of Asian countries.
Yes.
So we've come a long way, baby. I personally think we still have a long way to go. Step forward, couple steps back, and there are issues. There are issues with the whiplash to the whiplash. So again, I don't want to politicize our conversation, but I do want to highlight the sincerity of your story and use it to illustrate that even the sciences, I would say especially the sciences, are subject to this kind of thing because of the imbalance, the gender imbalance
Right.
between men and women in the sciences. And I think it does need to be fixed. How you fix it, whether you force it to be fixed or whether it gets fixed, that's again, I don't want to go there, but I think your story is reiterated. One of my favorite YouTubers, Sabine Hassenfelder, she has similar stories as yours, and the abuse even goes beyond just sex or that kind of violative physicality, but in terms of power itself, where women are marginalized, women are forced to really support men in this male dominated system, and it's a shame, and it needs to change, and most significantly it continues, and arguably at this stage of things is getting worse, not better. So there you have it. But the silver lining of that playbook is that you've done amazing work for so many kids who have learned to read and who have learned to really realize their own potential with their help.
Yeah, and I've really found my passion. I truly enjoy working with kids and teaching them. I just have found that the traditional classroom is not for me, and I enjoy one-on-one tutoring the best. I do like substituting too because you get a different classroom every day. Usually, I actually like when I get a classroom for 3 days versus say a month or two. But 3 days, you get to know the kids a little bit. They start to trust you. They listen to you more. You get a feeling of them, but then you're done and you're gone. So before they start acting up again.
You're like Aunt Michelle,
Yes.
right? You're not mommy or daddy, but you're Aunt Michelle. You just kind of show up and have fun, and
Yeah,
then you can go.
No, we I I think they would argue whether or not we're having a whole lot of fun.
Oh, I know.
I'm kind of
Of course,
strict.
I'm being facetious, but
Yeah.
by that I mean is you found that you prefer a flexible,
Yeah.
changing schedule and interacting with different kids in different levels in different schools much more edifying and rewarding and emotionally satisfying than if you just had one classroom.
Right. And also if you have a particular student that won't listen to you, it's all right as a substitute to walk away and they do their thing and for one day because you're only there one day. If they choose not to work for one day, it's not a huge deal. So if you've got one kid that just is oppositional defiant and will not work, rather than bring in the principal, I have learned that you can step away and most teachers will back you up if you write down. I asked them several times to do work, they refused. I left them alone.
Yeah, and also you get the good and the bad
Yeah.
because the benefit is exactly as you describe, which is okay, what can we do for now? Let's just keep the class more or less in order
Right.
and move on. The downside is, though, and I remember when I was that bad student in bad schools, aside from that one or two teachers that I cite, the substitute's here today. Woohoo! The party's starting. You can almost hear the Van Halen song playing.
Right. But I'm actually rather strict. So they don't get away with much. So as long as they're not hurting each other, they can sit there and do nothing. The one student. I can't have a whole five of them not doing anything, but usually the teacher will let me know if so and so does not do work, it's okay. That I get that a lot. And then if it's a bigger problem that they're actually being violent, then yes, then the principal comes in. But there's no need to really rock the boat if one student is choosing not to do work for the day. But if you're the main teacher, you cannot have a student just not do work every day.
Yeah, you know what it sounds like to me is like your sweet spot, your comfort level, and where you provide, this focused benefit is a one-on-one instructional setting where you could see results.
Yes.
And it's in small measured doses where you make maximum impact. And it's satisfying. You make incremental progress. And in this focus, you can absolutely work miracles like you did with the autistic child.
Yes.
However, when it's a collective group and you're really not in control and you can't really make that big a difference except to act like a cop or a babysitter, then you're like, yeah, all right, just behave, everybody.
Right.
I am here to make sure that you guys learn your lesson, at least today. And if you can't learn your lesson, just chill out, don't disrupt the class. And then, you call it a day that way.
Yeah.
So this has, I think, more to do with you than the dynamic of the class. And it's just your preference for making a difference in a child's life, as opposed to playing babysitter for a semester.
Right.
with a huge unruly class of kids.
Yeah, and what I liked about teaching was making that difference in that one
Right, I think that nails it.
Yeah,
Like,
I had a few students where I know I made a difference in their life, and that meant a lot to me. Where I knew what it wasn't so much what they were learning was as important as who they were, and sometimes the academics wasn't like one student was allowed to turn in assignments late. Well, he got the assignments in.
Right.
He was in an abusive situation and he didn't want to come to school. What had happened actually was he was abused sexually by his father. Father goes to jail. He gets out of jail. He gets visitation back, overnight visits. Of course, the kid doesn't want to come to school. So there was no law telling me I had to accept late work from him. But I'm like, just give me the work when you can get it to me.
Yeah, and then I think you're displaying just compassion and flexibility. Yeah. And again, this goes over and over again to the theme. If we could encapsulate this entire conversation in a theme, which is education, personal human empowerment is only possible with deep, empathetic personalization. You need to understand who is being educated, and the educator, whether it's a system, whether it's a full-time teacher, a substitute teacher, a personal tutor, has to adapt to the needs of the student rather than demanding that students adapt to the generic, standardized needs of a broken and dysfunctional system that's going to be looked at as absolutely medieval when we finally plug in the technology, at least that aspect of it, which is positive and hopeful, for understanding the data and customizing solutions to meet the unique needs of every user. And in this case, it's students in classrooms so that they could realize their full potential. Yay. So thanks so much, Michelle, for joining me on the Bald Ambition podcast. I will put a link to your website.
Thank you.
Part of my podcast, I like to shamelessly and enthusiastically promote all of my guests, whether they're a startup entrepreneur, whether they're an expert in FDA regulation, to be all you can be. You can click on that and connect with Michelle. If you need any services that she offers, indulge her. And thank you for listening. And the biggest takeaway for me, again, is that we have passionate people who really want to do good. And we just need to create the circumstances where folks like you are able to provide the expertise, the empathy, the focus, the caring, so that our children can go out there and be the next generation of Americans so that they could fix everything that we're now breaking. So thanks so much, Michelle. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.